Odin, king of the gods, the All-Father. You know the guy, but did you know that Odin once hung himself from a tree and plucked out his own eye, all to gain wisdom in order to avoid a future where he is eaten by Loki's son, a giant wolf? Yeah, Odin's whole story is a trip, so let's tell it, and start in the beginning of Norse mythology where there was just chaos, nothing, also called Ginnungagap. No, seriously, it was called Ginnungagap. The nothing, the chaos was called Ginnungagap. And above and below Ginnungagap, there was eternal ice and fire called Niflheim and Muspelheim. And eventually the two merged within Ginnungagap, and out of that, the first two beings emerged. The giant Ymir and a giant cow, Audumla. From Ymir's sweat, more giants were born, and the cow licked an icy rock into the shape of the first god, Buri. Buri thought that there must be a better way to have children than sweating and licking rocks, so he got sweaty with a giantess and licked and rocked her, and they had a son, Bor, who would then father Odin and his two brothers. And then Odin and his brothers killed Ymir, and Ymir's blood caused a flood that drowned the cow, Buri, Bor, Odin's mom, everybody. It was the first patricide, metricide, genocide, grandfathercide, every side, which is why I call this episode This was the beginning of what we now know as Norse mythology, and out of Ymir's giant corpse, Odin, with the help of his brothers, created the realms. Well, Muspelheim and Niflheim already existed, but Odin created Svartalfheim, home of the dwarves, Alfheim, home of the elves, Asgard, home of the Aesir gods, who know they were not actually called Asgardians. That's just Marvel and my favorite X-rated movies. You get it. That was good. I'm so childish. Vanaheim, home of the Vanir gods, Midgard, our earth, and Jotunheim, which is where the only two giants who were able to escape Odin's genocide fled to and repopulated their race with a lot of sweating and rock licking. The giants then became better known as the Jötnar, or the Jötun for singular, and weren't necessarily giant beings. They often looked human-like and were the forever enemies of the gods in Asgard. So the stage is set, the 9 realms exist, and Odin ruled over all of them from his throne in Asgard, married Frigg, and actually Frigg, that's the name, I'm not cussing, and allowed a giant, a Jötun, to live on Asgard as a god. A Jötun god he became blood brothers with, and who Odin swore would always have a place at his side. That Jötun was Loki, who would later cause the death of Odin's sons, while Loki's own son would cause the death of Odin himself. But Odin did not know that yet, because he wasn't yet the all-seeing father. At that point, Odin could not see fate itself, but he felt like he had to in order to properly rule over all the 9 realms. So after his warring days of uniting the realms and establishing order were over, Odin traded in his spear and armor for a top-tier Gandalf the Grey cosplay and wandered the realms, known only as the Wanderer, because his originality in naming himself was not one of his traits. On his journey, Odin learned the ways of every culture, every trade of magic. He became incredibly wise, and eventually he learned of magical runes of prophecy and wisdom carved into Yggdrasil, the tree of life, carved into that tree by the creators and masters of fate themselves, the Norse Norns, who weave the tapestry of fate made up of billions of strings, each representing the life and fate of a being, including the life and fates of the gods themselves, because in Norse mythology, the gods are not immortal. The fates told Odin that if he wants the knowledge of reading the runes, he has to test fate by hanging himself from the tree of life for 9 nights and 9 days. And as if this wasn't enough, he had to also stab himself in the chest with a spear beforehand. And also kind of just realized that I structured this thing poorly, because I already told you in the beginning that he hung from a tree. So yeah, surprise, surprise, he did that and he survived. Which, by the way, is okay that I spoiled that in the beginning, because I hate movies that halfway through they put the lead in like artificial mortal danger, as if we're gonna think Odin dies halfway through when the movie is called The Life of Odin. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Guardians of the Galaxy 3, Peter Quill. Really in space because of the music? Nah, come on. After 9 nights and 9 days, Odin gained the knowledge he was seeking. He understood the magical runes, and that gave him the ability to see the fate of the cosmos. And now Odin was able to see the end of that cosmos. He was able to see Ragnarok, which ended with him being devoured by a wolf. And because being swallowed by a random wolf has Loki written all over it, Odin quickly figured out that the wolf was his blood brother Loki's son, so he made Loki reveal the truth and learned that even though Loki was an Asgardian now, Aesir god, damn it Marva, Aesir god, he was an Aesir. Asgardian is just catchy, they're an Asgardian is catchy. Even though Loki was an Aesir god now, he had 3 secret monstrous children with a Jotun woman. Those children were the giant wolf Fenrir, the giant world serpent Jörmungandr, and a girl that was half beautiful and half a rotten corpse, Hel. Odin saw that all 3 children had a role to play in the end of the world in Ragnarok, so he banished the serpent to the oceans at the far end of our world. Thank you, Odin, for sending it to Earth. He chained up Fenrir and exiled the girl Hel into the underworld. But that wasn't enough, because Odin was so desperate to fight fate itself and prevent Ragnarok that he sought out more wisdom. And for that, he went to see Mimir, the wisest of all the Jötnar, guarding the well of wisdom, which sits at the foot of Yggdrasil, containing water that grants ultimate wisdom to whoever drinks it. And it goes without saying that Odin really wanted a drink of that water. And because it was for a noble cause, like saving the cosmos, Mimir told him that in order to be granted a sip, Odin had to rip out his own eye. For no apparent reason other than everybody here seemingly being sadistic as hell. Like, I held my tongue on the tree thing, but the unnecessary spear wound on top of the 9 days and nights of hanging, now the eye, my guys were just trolling Odin for real. But for Odin, there was no sacrifice too great for the sake of saving all life. So he ripped out his eye without hesitation, drank from the well of wisdom, and now Odin was the wisest thing in the cosmos, which ultimately led him to learn that fate is inevitable. Ragnarok was bound to happen. There was nothing Odin could do to stop it, and it would be signaled by the death of Odin's own favorite son. Which, no, it's not Thor. I know some of y'all into the story right now, like leaning forward and you're like, Thor, no. But nah, Odin's favorite son is not Thor. It's actually Baldur, the god of light. Still, even though he knew it was inevitable, Odin was determined to not go down without a fight. And knowing what's coming, him and the goddess FREYJA basically came up with a drafting system for the army that would face off against evil in the war at the end of times. They created the Valkyries to recruit people for Valhalla. The Valkyries were beautiful women that would scour the battlefields to collect the souls of the bravest slain warriors and bring those souls to Valhalla, where they would enter an eternal training arc, fight all day, drink all night, and be healed over, I guess, the rest of the night. Rinse and repeat until the day Ragnarok calls, and all the warriors would storm out of Valhalla's 550 doors, each so wide that 800 warriors can storm through side by side. An army of elite warriors, each warrior granted the title Einherja, which translates to Army of One, and believe it or not, is also the name I gave to my penis. Other than prepare the army of Einherja, Odin did everything he could to avoid what he knew was meant to be the trigger for Ragnarok, the death of his son Baldur. Odin and his wife went to every being in the cosmos, animals, plants, humans, gods, giants, and made them all swear an oath to never harm Baldur. The only thing that they forgot to ask was the mistletoe tree. And decades later, when they thought they were safe, and Odin believed to maybe have successfully stopped Ragnarok, the All-Father was betrayed from a source he never expected, his blood brother Loki. Loki could never forgive Odin for locking away and exiling his children, and he built up hatred against Odin and his beloved son, Baldur, and he worked tirelessly to find a way to kill Baldur, and eventually found out that the mistletoe tree never swore an oath to not harm Baldur, so Loki made an arrow out of mistletoe, which was then used to kill Odin's son, and was the beginning of the end, the beginning of Ragnarok. Odin was furious, but since he swore a blood oath to Loki, he couldn't kill him, so he thought of something that was somehow even more devious. See, Loki didn't just have 3 monstrous children that Odin exiled. Loki also had a family on Asgard, a family of Aesir gods, and Odin punished Loki by tying him to a rock with the intestines of Loki's own Aesir son. Bruh, noja. So now Loki was tied to a rock with the intestines of his son, but Odin made sure Loki would suffer even more under drips of vicious poison above him that would drip on his forehead while Loki was unable to move and cause a pain so agonizing that it only cemented Loki's hatred for Asgard and Odin. See, in all of Odin's attempts to prevent Ragnarok, it was him training up Fenrir, banishing Jormungandr and Hel, and Loki's anger over the treatment of his children and the pain Loki suffered in his eternal torture under poisonous drops tied to a rock with the intestines of yet another one of his children. All that is what really caused Ragnarok, because what Odin didn't know, didn't foresee, is that the army of evil consuming Asgard during Ragnarok would be led by Loki himself. Odin's wisdom and knowledge of the prophecy was the deciding factor in it being self-fulfilling. Fate could not be avoided. Loki eventually broke free from his captivity, freed his children, and with the help of his daughter, who became the queen of the underworld, and Surtur, a fire giant hidden away in the eternal fire of Muspelheim, Loki mustered up an army of evil and launched Ragnarok, a war to end the world. Thor, you know,
God of Thunder, strongest Avenger.
that's what you know him as, but the real Thor was actually a chubby redhead with anger management issues that could not fly, but instead rode around on a chariot drawn by 2 goats called Tooth Gnasher and Tooth Grinder. Mans was on the Santa Claus thing for real. Also, you know the giants from Norse mythology that are evil and the enemies of the gods? They are called Jötnar, and Thor is actually 3/4 Jötnar and only 1/4 Aesir god, because Thor's mother was a Jötnar that Odin cheated on his wife with. Yeah, they don't tell you that in the usual mythology stories, but that's why I'm here today and why I call this episode The fact that Thor is 3/4 Jötnar makes it even more messed up that he made it his mission to single-handedly genocide the Jötnar race. No one in Norse mythology has killed more Jötun than Thor, and that's tragically ironic because it's thanks to his Jötun blood that Thor is even that strong, physically stronger than every other god, including Odin. And if you've been keeping up with the math, Thor being 3/4 Jötun means that yes, his father, Odin, has to be half Jötun himself. That's the intro done. Now let's first talk about Thor's hammer and then we'll talk about Mjolnir. Get it? That was a good one. Might take a while, but when you get it, you're like, oh, damn, that's funny. Hammer, Mjolnir, you get it. Alright, I'm gonna skip straight to grown Thor because there isn't really much about childhood Thor. It's even hotly debated who Thor's mother really is. We just know that she's a Jötun, and usually it's assumed that she was the Jötun Jörd, the personification of the earth in Norse mythology, who then became one of Odin's baby mamas. Thor's story only really starts once he gets his hammer Mjolnir, which he got from his uncle Loki. Yes, Uncle Loki, because in Norse mythology, Loki and Thor are not brothers. One day, the mature older Uncle Loki decided to play a prank on his nephew Thor by cutting his wife Siv's hair off. Why? It's just typical Loki stuff. So after that was done, Thor was mad, and when thick mythological red-haired Thor gets mad, somebody usually dies. So Loki had to appease his nephew, and in order to appease an angry strongman with murderous intentions, it's apparently a good idea to craft the strongest weapon in the universe for him, Mjolnir. In order to do that, Loki resorted to more trickery and lies, because he clearly did not learn his lesson at all. Loki challenged the dwarven blacksmiths by basically saying, I bet you can't craft the greatest weapon ever, which triggered them because the dwarves were known to be the greatest blacksmiths in the universe. So I'd like to think that they were literally just like, hold my beer, you know, because they're dwarves, and dwarves always drink beer, right? So no, wait, in the ancient North, they would have said, hold my meat. No, meat with a D. Not hold my meat. I'm too childish for these. And because Loki is Loki, he wagered his life on the bet for no reason other than to spice things up. And the dwarves were crafting Mjolnir, and it actually started to look like the best weapon ever. So Loki sabotaged their work by transforming into a fly and bit one of the blacksmith dwarves in the eye so that Mjolnir wouldn't actually become the greatest weapon ever. Loki wins the bet and saves his life, and that's why now the handle of Mjolnir is so short compared to its head. A problem that's not funny at all because it's something that many men face these days, and no, those pills that are advertised, they will not help you. Trust me. I'm not talking from experience. If there was ever any doubt left, Mjolnir definitely cemented Thor as the strongest of all the Norse gods. And on top of that, Thor also had a magical belt and gloves that are often not mentioned. The gloves, Jerngriper, were necessary to handle Mjolnir's force, along with the belt that just simply and literally doubled Thor's power and has the most difficult name ever.
Thor's magic belt.
By the way, in Norse mythology, wielding Mjolnir has nothing to do with being worthy, just Thor being the only god strong enough to lift it. So one day, the gods' giant enemies, the Jötnar, who are also insanely strong, decided to steal Mjolnir and hid it from Thor and demanded the goddess of beauty and love in exchange, Freyja. Obviously a ridiculous request, so Thor said, okay, deal, and went to get Freyja. But Freyja said, hell no, are you kidding me, Thor? What the f? Also, Freyja was slightly offended that Thor would just trade her for his hammer. So then Heimdall, the Watcher, had a genius idea. Let's dress this massive, brawny, bearded, red-haired god of thunder up in a wedding gown and present him to the giants as Freyja. And they actually did that, they tried that, and it worked, because I don't know why that worked. Anyway, fast forward to the wedding, and the Jötnar didn't catch on to fake Freyja Thor, even though fake Freyja Thor ate a whole ox and drank tens of liters of beer in that gown. Like, this seriously sounds like a very bad 90s, early 2000s Adam Sandler, Eddie Murphy comedy or something, you know? The giants totally fell for it and were pleased with having conquered Freyja. So they presented fake Freyja with Mjolnir, and fake Freyja was like, aha! I'm Thor, dun dun dun. And then he slaughtered everybody at that party. Like every single person, he slaughtered them with that hammer, smashed the skulls in and everything. Because that's what Thor was about. That's Thor in a nutshell, murdering his way out of every problem. And he did that until the very end. Because the Norse gods are not immortal, so there is an actual ending for Big Boy Sparkles in Norse mythology. Thor dies during Ragnarok at the hands of Loki's son, the world serpent Jormungandr. Thor clashed with Jormungandr many times throughout his adventures, and in this final epic battle that would have looked something like straight out of a kaiju movie, Thor defeated the giant serpent, but not without being wounded by its venomous bite. And after the battle, Thor was only able to take 9 more steps, one for each of the 9 realms, before succumbing to the poison and dying. But hey, at least we have Thursday now to remember him. You know, Thursday, Thor's Day, that's where we got that name from. What do you know about Loki? The real Loki, not the Marvel one. We usually know that Loki is a trickster, but it is because of Marvel that there is a common misconception that Loki is Thor's brother and somewhat of a good guy / anti-hero type of dude.
Your savior is here!
Well, I hate to be the one to break this to you, but Loki is responsible for the end of the world. He is not Thor's brother. He is, however, the sworn blood brother of Odin, which is cool, because it's like bad boys for life, bro, what's up? Until Loki kills Odin's son. Yeah, that makes you a bad guy in my book. And Loki also gave birth to a horse once, an 8-legged horse, so in my dictionary that makes you a weird guy, and weird and bad is a combination that usually makes you very dangerous, which Loki is. And all of his children are bringers of evil. One of Loki's sons is a giant wolf that kills Odin during Ragnarok. Another one of Loki's sons is a giant snake that kills Thor during Ragnarok. And Loki's daughter, Hel, rules the eponymous Hel that gives Loki the army to invade Asgard and start Ragnarok to end the universe. So clearly, at some point, somebody should have made Loki get a vasectomy. I mean, damn, this guy's seed is dangerous, bro. At least condoms or something. I don't know what it was back in the day. Sheepskin? I mean, make Loki wrap it up, bro. Come on. And all of the above is why I call this episode Note that there are some detailed extra facts about Loki that don't really fit the flow of my storytelling, but for completion's sake, I'll include them at the end of the video, so watch until then if you want everything there is to know about Loki. Let's start in the beginning. No one knows where Loki really comes from. Nobody except for him and his blood brother Odin. In Norse mythology, Loki just appears in Asgard one day after Odin already established that realm and all the 8 others and sits on the throne as the All-Father, ruling over everything. Loki literally just appears and asks Odin to make good on his blood brother promise, because Odin promised that wherever he drinks, Loki shall have a place. That is why Loki is made one of the Aesir gods, even though he is not a god. Loki was born a Jotun, which makes him a Jötna, which you might know better as the frost giants or the enemies of the gods. No one really knows how Loki and Odin became blood brothers. It's long in their past and might have something to do with Odin being half Jotun himself. Yeah, surprise. If you didn't know that, the main god is actually half Jotun and the Jotun are the enemies of the gods. So that's a self-hate boner that Odin has right there. I don't know. But him and Loki are blood brothers. Remember that. As an Aesir, Loki often fought with the other gods against his own kin, the Jötnar, and was also the one responsible for Thor getting his powerful hammer Mjolnir, aka the weapon of mass genocide against the Jötnar, and Odin receiving his powerful spear Gungnir. But in general, all the good Loki did was usually the god of mischief making up for trouble he caused in the first place. Like this story, for example. The Aesir gods were building a wall around Asgard and were running out of labor. So Loki was like, hey, let's ask one of our savage neighbors / enemies, a Jotun, since they're so strong, they should be really good at construction work against their will. Sounds like something somebody would say before they hop on that ship to Africa to get themselves a bunch of slaves, so I don't know how that makes me feel about Loki. They asked Jotun, and he said that if he gets the job done within their desired deadline, he wants to marry the goddess of beauty, FREYJA, in return. A ridiculous request, since FREYJA was one of the most dignified and important goddesses in all of Asgard. So Loki said, okay, yeah, that sounds reasonable. Deal. All the gods freaked out, but Loki never intended to give the Jotun a realistic deadline. He set him up to fail from the start. Typical Loki scheme. Also a typical slaver's scheme. Damn, Loki. With the prospect of tapping Freya's divine booty, this Jotun was working at that thirst speed, you get me? And with the help of his giant horse, a powerful stallion, it looked like Freya was set for a Jotun wedding because he was about to make the deadline. But Loki found a solution to the problem he created in the first place. He sabotaged the giant's work, making him miss the deadline by shape-shifting into a female horse to lure the giant stallion away and have sex with it. Standard diversion tactic. For Loki, that's standard diversion tactics. But it worked. The giant missed the deadline, Freya was safe, and Loki was pregnant.
Surprise!
All good though, because he then gave birth to an 8-legged horse that Odin rides to this day. Stories like that were basically what Loki was all about, and there's tons of them. Like, Loki is also responsible for the curse of a golden ring of power that brought doom to generations of dwarves, a story that later inspired the Lord of the Rings, and a lot of other stuff. The point is that anything good Loki does involves a problem he caused, and he uses his wits and trickery to solve it. But there was a general trend of Loki's deeds and missteps progressively getting worse and worse, all pointing to an eventual disaster. Foreshadowing. That are already spoiled in the intro. Because I started the intro with Ragnarok this, Ragnarok that, so you kind of already know. Even said he brings Ragnarok. Okay. Loki also had a family on Asgard, his wife Sigyn and his two sons Narfi and Vali. Remember that, an Aesir family. But my man also had a bit of a giant fetish and got his freak on the side with the giantess Angrboda, with whom he had 3 slightly different children. The giant wolf Fenrir, the giant snake Jörmungandr, and Hel, a woman that was half beautiful and half corpse. Again, vasectomy at some point, I don't know, maybe after the wolf? Definitely after the snake. The kids were secret, living in Jotunheim, in the home of the Jötnar. But at some point, Odin had visions of the end of the world, of Ragnarok, and everybody's death at the hand of a snake and a wolf and a half-corpse woman. And he was like, yeah, that has Loki written all over it. So he forced their location out of Loki and sent Thor and the god of war THOR to get the children. Then Odin threw the snake into the ocean to die, sent the half-corpse woman into hell to be with the other corpses, and they kept the wolf because it was a puppy, and puppies are cute. THOR was the one who raised the wolf, Fenrir, who grew bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and so massive that he really became a problem, and Odin had him chained to a rock for all eternity, because that's how you deal with problems. And I guess also, he wasn't a puppy anymore. He wasn't cute.
You're still the cutest. You're still the cutest. You're still the cutest. I love you so much. I know you don't.
So with his kids locked away by his supposed blood brother Odin, Loki wasn't exactly feeling the blood love as much anymore and grew increasingly distant and angry. And his anger singled in on Odin's favorite son, Baldur, the god of light. Good, kind, happy, helpful, beloved by all, essentially the opposite of Loki. Baldur, though, was once prophesied to die, so Odin and Baldur's mother Frigg made sure to get a promise from everything in existence to never harm Baldur. People, gods, objects, plants, everything, all to avoid Baldur dying, not just for the sake of their son, but also since the prophecy mentioned that Baldur's death would be the catalyst for Ragnarok, the end of the world. And it worked. After everything swore an oath not to harm Baldur, Baldur was. Nothing could harm him, not axes, not spears, not fire, nothing. So the Viking gods turned this into a game where they would get drunk and casually hurl spears and other weapons at Baldur that just bounced off of him because, that's how you responsibly deal with prophecy and don't tempt fate at all. It's the Viking way of doing things. Everybody was having fun with Invincible Baldur, which just made Loki increasingly more jealous and angry. So he made it his mission to find out how he can harm this beloved invincible god of light, and found out that no one's ever gotten a promise from the laurel tree not to harm Baldur. So Loki went to the laurel tree, fashioned an arrow out of laurel, and never wanted to hold the smoking gun himself, had Baldur's blind brother shoot the arrow at Baldur while guiding his aim and telling the brother it was a normal arrow that would just bounce off of Invincible Baldur like everything else that was thrown at him as part of the drinking game. The laurel arrow was fired, struck Baldur in the heart, and killed him. Despite Loki's best efforts, it was however quickly found out that he was responsible, and this was a mess Loki couldn't talk his way out of. The god of mischief crossed the line. This was not just mischief, this was murder. And because everybody loved Baldur, everybody wanted Loki dead. But Odin and Loki were still sworn blood brothers, remember? So Odin couldn't kill him since he promised Loki would always have a place by his side. So instead, he tied Loki against a rock in a cave on Asgard, tied Loki to said rock with the intestines of a name I asked you to remember earlier, the intestines of Loki's Aesir son Narfi. But for Odin's wrath, having Loki tied to the rock with the intestines of his own son wasn't enough. Odin also had poison endlessly drip on Loki's forehead, causing agonizing pain with every drop. This was Loki's forever fate, and his loyal wife Sigyn remained by his side for all of his eternal punishment, collecting all the dripping poison in a bowl, shielding Loki from the pain. That's my definition for ride or die from now on. I don't care, man. That's going on my Tinder profile. If you're not like Loki's wife, miss me with that shit. But when the bowl was full and she had to empty it, the poison would hit Loki's forehead and the pain would be so agonizing that Loki would shake so viciously it would cause earthquakes throughout the 9 realms, including Midgard, aka Earth. AKA our earthquakes are caused by Loki's pain. How cool is that? That's one of those cool mythology facts that I love. Loki was destined to suffer this fate forever and spent ages tied to the rock with nothing to do but planning his revenge and building up his hatred for Odin and the gods, as did his chained up wolf son Fenrir, as did his serpent son Jörmungandr, exiled to the far oceans while growing so big he could circle the world, all the while Loki's daughter Hel, ruling the underworld, was preparing the army her father needed for the day he would free himself and unleash his vengeance upon all. Unleash Ragnarok. Time for the extra notes. There are not a lot of extra notes in this one, but I want to point out that Loki, the god of mischief, is basically the OG trickster and responsible for the trickster archetype. So all those trickster characters you know and love, like the Joker from Batman and Hisoka from Hunter x Hunter, and many others all throughout pop culture, they're all inspired by Loki. I kind of wanted to include Loki from Vikings in this list, but I think that one's pretty obvious. I briefly mentioned Loki ruining generations of dwarves with a golden ring. That tale is known as the Völsung Saga, an epic tale that later inspired the famous Der Ring des Nibelungen, The Hobbit, and The Lord of the Rings. The goddess of sex, lust, love, and beauty, Freyja, is also a goddess of war. And you know the legendary warriors that go to Valhalla? Yeah, they're second round draft picks. Freyja gets to pick first among all the slain Viking warriors for her own legendary Warriors Hall of Fame that you probably never heard of. And what even fewer people heard of is that Freyja once had a gangbang with 4 dwarves. To be fair, we don't know if it was a gangbang or if the 4 dwarves took turns. Is my video gonna get demonetized for saying the word gangbang? Gangbang, 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 gang. That's a tongue twist, man. Yeah, I'm aware my videos are being used as educational videos in some schools. I know now y'all wanna know the details about the gang that banged Freyja, but there's a structure to this video and there's a lot more to Freyja and her stories. So, let's do this. Freyja's story starts away from Asgard because Freyja is not an Aesir goddess. She is of a different lineage, a different realm. Freyja is a Vanir goddess from Vanaheim, daughter of the mighty Njord, god of the sea, king of the Vanir, and a thorn in Odin's side. Because even though Odin ruled from Asgard, the mighty Allfather wanted supremacy over all the 9 realms. So Odin and the Aesir gods, you know, Thor, THOR, HEIMDALL and them, they went to war with Njord and the Vanir, the most notable of which are Njord's children, the twins Freyja and Freyr. Gods versus gods, an endless war. And that's not me embellishing, it literally was an endless war, which also made it a pointless war to continue since the only consistent outcome was continuous bloodshed. Find the social commentary in this one. So the Aesir and the Vanir eventually had to come to peace terms and agreed to exchange hostages and merge their lineages. Being the loving father that he is, Njord's choice for a hostage was his own daughter Freyja, and thus Freyja was made an Aesir goddess. And before long, she more than merged into Aesir culture. She ascended to be one of the most important goddesses in Asgard, a symbol of beauty and everything men and women desire, lust, love, and wealth. But at the same time, Freyja was a fierce warrior, and yet none of this mentions her most defining feature. Freyja was a völva, and as such she practiced Seidr, which is just an ancient Norse way to say she was a seer and thus could see into the future. In the ancient North, that was considered a very feminine quality, but there was one man, a god, who was above such small-minded stereotypes and desired the power anyway: Odin. Odin was obsessed with seeing the future of the cosmos because he made it his life's mission to prevent Ragnarok. And since Freyja was one of the few able to see the future, Odin really respected Freyja big time, which is to say he was mad thirsty for Freyja's divine booty and really tried to tap that. Lucky for Odin, Freyja was about that life, and her and Odin got it on. But to be fair, Freyja really was about that life and also got it on with a bunch of other gods. Which ones exactly is unknown, but according to Loki, Freyja got it on with literally, and I quote here, everybody. End of quote. And by everybody, Loki also included himself and Freyja's twin brother Freyr. A serious accusation coming out of a drunk Loki at one of the Aesir gods' famed feasts. At this particular feast, drunk Loki went on a serious rant, literally dissing all the gods, and also felt like it was time for history's first serious case of some slut-shaming, so he also laid it on all the Norse goddesses, claiming they all slept with him and everybody else here too, and Loki specifically also singled out Freyja. But the thing is, we're talking about Freyja. We're talking about the personification of beauty and lust. You think you're gonna shame her for enjoying her beauty and lust? Bro, when I tell you Freyja took off them earrings and them heels with a quickness, you know what I mean? You don't mess with Freyja. And you certainly don't shame her because Freyja does what Freyja does. Which reminds me of... So the story starts with Freyja wanting a special necklace that 4 dwarves made, and the 4 dwarves wanted Freyja, so Freyja slept with all of them. End of story. To be fair, some people do that for just a fancy handbag. I'm just saying, at least Freyja did it for a magical necklace, you know what I mean? But actually, let me rewind here a little. The necklace in question is Brisingamen, and it was another masterpiece of dwarven craftsmanship. A necklace that makes its wearer irresistible, which actually that's entirely unnecessary for Freyja to have because she's literally the personification of lust and quite irresistible. But whatever, I guess even the perfect goddess, the personification of lust, love, and beauty, had insecurities about maybe not being desirable anymore. How very human of her. Honestly makes me feel a little bit better about myself. Yeah. So 4 naughty knights with 4 naughty dwarfs it was. And if you're trying to visualize this one now, I'll have you know that there is no indication in Norse mythology that dwarfs are actually short. That's never mentioned. Also note that this whole Freyja and the dwarf story is highly controversial and very influenced by later Christian writings. So I have extensive notes on this at the end of the video. After Freyja slept with the dwarf, she was rocking some serious bling, and Loki took notice. And it didn't take him long to find out what Freyja did to get that bling, and it was a new opportunity for Loki to sow chaos. So Loki did what Loki does, and he told Freyja's other lover, Odin. Odin was pissed that Freyja slept with the dwarves, which is pretty ironic coming from a guy who was literally cheating on his wife with Freyja. But hey, again, how very human of the mighty god Odin to be insecure and butthurt over his mistress having other lovers. Well, you know. So Odin took the necklace from Freyja and told her that if she wants it back, she has to use her magic to curse 2 human kings to wage war against one another for eternity until a Christian king defeats them. If that seems super random, that's because it is super random, and again, that's that Christian influence that I have extensive notes on later in this video. Alright, now you get the picture that Freyja is a goddess as beautiful as she is desired and as desired as she is lustful. This is in line with the Vanir tribe because, reminder, Freyja is not an Aesir goddess, she is Vanir, and if the Aesir gods are defined by being strict and ordered, then the Vanir gods are like the hippie gods. And fittingly, they are mostly worshipped for fertility. Freya and her twin brother Freyr are the goddess and god of fertility, and her brother Freyr's symbol is literally a phallus. For those lesser versed in English language, that means his symbol was a dick. Yeah, the Vanir were really about that life, and that's why Freya wasn't shy about it either. This was a goddess freed from all shackles, and the beauty in all of this is that her name, Freya, literally translates to lady, since she was seen as the epitome of a lady. So there's some really relevant social commentary in here along the lines of a true lady simply being free from social expectations, owning her own body and sexuality, being unshackled. You know, just food for thought. Problem was, Freya was kind of married. Yeah, she had a husband. Technically, her and Odin, her and the dwarves, her and whoever, yeah, that was all cheating. Even though the Norse were very sexually open and women were also empowered and independent, fidelity within marriage was still sacred. So Freya was supposed to be faithful to her husband Odr. But throughout all mythological texts, it is said that her husband Odr was literally never around, like never. And bro, if your wife is the goddess of lust personified, bro, what you doing leaving her alone? What you think she's gonna do? I mean, come on. And it's not like Freya didn't care about her husband. She wanted him to be there. In fact, Freya cried so much over him constantly leaving and her being alone that her tears fell onto Midgard, our earth, where they materialized into gold. Hence, why Freya is also known as the goddess of wealth. And because Freya was always alone, literally everybody treated her as single and wanted to marry this already married woman. Not just the gods either. Even the Jötnar, the enemies of the gods, were simping for Freya. So one of the Jötnar, the builder Svadilfari, approached the Aesir gods when he heard that they needed a defensive wall built around Asgard and they didn't have the labor to do it. So Svadilfari came in with an offer. I can build your wall for you, but in return, I want Freya. Loki was in charge of the construction and he agreed to the deal, but before the giant finished the wall and cashed in on Freya as his reward, Loki transformed into a horse and lured the giant's workhorse away to have sex with it so that the giant couldn't finish the job in time. And then Loki was pregnant and gave birth to a horse with 8 legs. Yeah, I know you have questions on this, so watch my Loki video where I go more in detail. The other Jotun that tried to force Freya's hand was King Thrym, the king of the Jötnar. Thrym stole Thor's hammer Mjolnir in complete secrecy. No one knew who stole the hammer, and all of Asgard was in a panic because, oh my god, Thor's hammer is gone. We need it, because it's not even ridiculous. Mjolnir was so powerful in Thor's hands that they really needed Thor to have Mjolnir to protect the realm. Without it, Asgard was unprotected. So finding Thor's hammer became everybody's priority number 1. Sounds like a bachelorette party for goddesses. Conveniently, Freya had a magical cloak made of feathers, and whoever wears it can fly. So to aid with the search, she gave Loki that coat, and Loki flew around the 9 realms until he located Mjolnir in Jotunheim, the land of the Jötnar. There, Loki talked to King Thrym, who offered him a deal. I can give you the hammer back, but in return, I want Freya. Loki was like, that sounds very familiar, and remembered how bargaining Freya the first time didn't work out so well. So of course, Loki agreed to the deal. Hey, listen, I told you, Loki does what Loki does. It's another chance for him to sow chaos. Oh, I get it. Loki reported back to Freya, and Freya was so angry at him that her outburst sent an earthquake through Asgard, and in the trembles, Freya's special necklace fell off. Remember? Brisingamen, the 4 dwarfs? Of course you remember, they're still living in your head rent-free. And do you also remember what the necklace Brisingamen does? Make the wearer irresistible. So Freya and Heimdall came up with an idea. Let's dress Thor up in a wedding dress and make him wear the necklace so that he's irresistible and he can pretend to be Freya. It's a genius. And then you can get the hammer back. Literally the plot if Adam Sandler ever did a Norse Mythology comedy. So that's what they did. And it worked. Wearing a wedding dress like he was born to do it, Thor fooled all the Jötnar at the wedding, who were mesmerized by the magical necklace. And when fake Freya Thor was presented with his wedding gift, his hammer Mjolnir, he kindly returned the favor and presented the giants with their wedding gift. He killed everybody in the room, smashed all of their heads in, aka the first Red Wedding. the Valkyries. As you know about the Valkyries, sometimes they are depicted as winged warrior women, sometimes they are warrior women on winged horses, sometimes they are warrior women on winged wolves. But you get the gist. The Valkyries are always warrior women, and they scour the battlefields to collect the souls of the bravest slain warriors and deliver them to Valhalla, Odin's great halls, where these warriors then eternally train and drink for Ragnarok, the ultimate battle at the end of times. That's the story that everybody knows. What no one knows is that all these dudes Odin gathers are literally Freyja's sloppy seconds. Freyja is the lady of Folkvangr, and for her Hall of Fame of warriors, she gets the first pick amongst the slain Vikings, and the Valkyries deliver them to her first. Yeah, even though the Valkyries serve Odin. And because of that, there's a common misconception that the Valkyries somehow serve Freyja and that Freyja is a Valkyrie or the queen of the Valkyries. Nah, she just gets first pick. And we don't really know why Odin would allow Freyja such a courtesy. A common theory is that it was part of the peace agreement between the Vanir and the Aesir after the war. You know, the Aesir get Freyja and also she gets first pick of the slain, but no one really knows why. And in the end, it doesn't really matter because all the warriors from Valhalla and all the warriors in Freyja's Folkvangr, they all serve the same purpose. They all fight in Ragnarok against the army of evil. Most believe that Folkvangr really only differs from Valhalla in its appearance. Folkvangr literally translates to field of armies, and since Freyja rules over it, it is believed to be a beautiful field, you know, mirroring Freyja's beauty, just filled with armies, training and chilling in nature rather than training and drinking in a meat hall in Valhalla. It's also assumed that Freyja picked the more refined warriors, the ones that are not just about drinking, ravaging, and fighting mindlessly like animals. Kind of if Odin's Valhalla-bound warriors are more like super alpha Dothraki, then Freyja's warriors would be more like the Jaime Lannisters. Still alpha, still brave, still ruthless, still driven by passion, but all packaged within a touch of class and elegance, just like the goddess Freyja herself. Time for the extra notes. As you could tell, that whole Valkyrie section was filled with a lot of me assuming things. And in fact, that's true for a lot of this video and a lot of Norse mythology tales in general, since so many of them are poorly documented or scattered and vary over time. A great example of that are the dwarves. Nowadays, they're just dwarves and assumed to be short, but in Norse mythology, they are never described as short. In fact, they're not even dwarfs at all. In the mythology, the elves are called Ljósalfar and the dwarves are called Dökkalfar, which really makes them the black elves or the dark elves. And also, they were more than just cave dwellers. To these dark elves, earth was like water to a fish or air to us. So you can think of them as like dirt fish, literally living in the ground, and contact with sun even turned them into stone. So since the dwarves were dark elves and not gods, they were then described in the ancient texts as lesser supernatural beings. And later, Christians who documented a lot of Norse tales translated lesser to mean short, and then added ugly for no reason. So over time, the dark elves became dwarves who are just short and ugly. And speaking of Christians adding things, the whole part with Freyja and the ganging and the banging with the four dwarfs, this appeared in the Sörla Patra, which was written in the 14th century by two Christian priests. Essentially, it was as much Norse mythology as it was a smear piece meant to discredit the Norse gods and to degrade Freyja. But the story of Freyja and the dwarfs and the necklace still became a mainstay in Norse mythology of today. And if you ask me, it doesn't make Freyja any less amazing. Remember that Freyja is a Vanir, and among many titles, the goddess of lust, the closest thing to the personification of lust. Our standards, or ethics, or morals, or whatever we have, do not apply to her. And also, back in the ancient North, a woman's sexuality was a beautiful and powerful thing, and her business. So they wouldn't have thought anything of Freyja enjoying herself. Of course, that went against Christian values though, so this whole Freyja and the dwarf story was an attempt to suppress all of that and highlight the power of Christianity, which is driven home and made very evident by the fact that this whole story is then resolved with a Christian king that dominates the northern heathen kings. Yeah, tell me you're Christian without telling me you're Christian. There's a theory that Freya and Odin's wife Frigg are actually the same goddess. And there's a lot of reason to believe that. They both have a coat that allows them to fly. They both have the ability of foresight, and their names are Freya and Frigg, which, if you trace the names back, both originate from the ancient Germanic word Freya, which means beloved, love, freedom, all attributes associated with either Frigg or Freya or both. And this ancient Freya is also the origin for the word Friday. And Freya's husband was Wodanas, which is the root of the word Wednesday, but more importantly also the root of the word Odin. You still with me? Because I'm gonna throw one more name into the mix here to make it more complicated. Remember Odr, Freya's husband? Yeah, that sounds an awful lot like Odin, doesn't it? So let me summarize this. We have Freya and Frigg, who share the same name and origin and similar abilities, and we have Odr and Odin, who share the same name and origin and are both travelers that are always wandering and never really around. Also, both Freya and Frigg and Odin are associated with Friday and Wednesday respectively. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that all three come from Freya and Wodanas from the ancient Germanic beliefs. But that doesn't make Freya and Frigg the same goddess in Norse mythology, because in Norse mythology, they literally both appear within the same story, even talking to one another. So they are two different goddesses in Norse mythology. They just obviously evolved out of the ancient Freya. And this bit, I didn't really know where to fit it in the video, so I'm gonna add it here. Some texts say that Freya's cloak that made her fly was made out of falcon wings and literally also transformed her into a falcon. And Freya also has a battle pig and giant cats that pull her chariot. I mean, all of that is so anime that I love it. And I need an anime with a main character that can transform into a falcon, rides a pig into battle, and has giant cats that also accompany her into her fights. That'll be the most epic anime. I need this. Heimdall, the god who sees everything, including the future. This god had 9 moms, 1 dad, 9 mothers, and they were all sisters too. I know, right? Why can't I watch that movie? Is that like an OnlyFans thing, or what's up with that? Heimdall's father is, of course, Odin, the All-Father. And when you're the All-Father and you come across 9 beautiful Jotun sisters ready for some daddy roleplay, well, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. And 9 months later, 9 sisters gave birth to 1 child, Heimdall. I don't know if they each carried Heimdall for a month or how that works, but we don't question Norse mythology too much, because this is also where Loki gave birth to a horse with 8 legs and his baby mama birthed a snake that can circle the world. It is what it is. The 9 moms' combined efforts blessed Heimdall with powers of sight and hearing. He can hear so well, he hears the grass and the wool on the back of sheep growing, and he can see for 100 miles even in the dark and into the future, which is why Heimdall and his famous horn, Gjallarhorn, play a very important role within Asgard. But Heimdall and his other horn were also quite famous. My guy had a serious body count and virtually no pull-out game, like none. But more details on that later. Oh, and for all the Loki fans, Heimdall also kills Loki. Now you have all the headlines. What's missing is the details. So let's do this. I already touched on Heimdall's inexplicable 9 moms birth that granted him his insane all-seeing, all-hearing powers, which naturally then made him the perfect guardian for Asgard. With Heimdall standing guard at Asgard's trippy rainbow bridge, the Bifrost, no one could enter unseen. And in fact, no one in Asgard could do anything unseen. My guy sees 100 miles in the dark, sees the future, hears everything, no privacy, you get me. You are forever flicking beans and pulling your one-eyed monster to an audience of the all-seeing monster. Heimdall is always watching. Dude had the stalker skill tree leveled to the max without even trying, which explains why his guard post at the Bifrost was famously always stacked with tons of alcohol. My man was enjoying the show while getting his buzz on. The only thing about it that sucks is that Heimdall's drunk peep show was a lonely existence. While the other gods partied and mingled, Heimdall's place was at his guard post. Since the Bifrost connects Asgard to all the other realms, someone had to document all the coming and going. Though it's never explicitly stated in the ancient texts that giving entering and exit permits as part of Heimdall's job, it's gotta be. Because as far as just warning Asgard of an invasion, Heimdall could do that from anywhere. He sees everything and the future. The ancient texts don't refer to Heimdall as Asgard's bouncer, but I like to think he was. I mean, the dude was described to have golden teeth, and the ancient texts don't state any other god was wearing grills, so that's literally the most bouncer thing ever. And while on bouncer duty, Heimdall always had his massive horn ready, which is a joke I already made once, so I'm gonna skip past it right here and go to the actual name. The Gjallarhorn. One blow is all it takes. One blow is all it takes to warn all of Asgard, and blowing the Gjallarhorn was reserved for one occasion only, the coming of Ragnarok. So Heimdall only ever used it once. And a cool side note here is that this all kind of reminds me of the Wall and the Night Watch in Game of Thrones, like lonely existence, lots of drinking, blowing into a horn to announce danger. You see it too, right? So with all the loneliness in mind, you can forgive Heimdall for being a bit of a homewrecker. This guy had a bit of a fetish for sleeping with other dudes' wives, next to the dude. It sounds weird, but Google it. It's like a whole genre. And some of these movies these days have insane production value. Like, it's crazy. Heimdall's habit of putting his horn where it doesn't belong is why Heimdall is also known by another title.
It's Mr. Steal Your Girl.
Okay, I made that title up, but you see what I mean, and you'll agree. The story goes that Heimdall ventured from his guard post for some action from time to time. You know, just like the Night's Watch enjoy a secret dip into the nearest brothel town once in a while. Granted, with his powers, Heimdall could still perform his watch duty while out and about on booty duty. And while he was out, Mr. Steal Your Girl had 3 conquests in general that I want to focus on. 3 conquests during which he casually created classism and became known as the father of all slaves, the father of all farmers, and the father of all nobles. So all in all, the father of social classes. One night, Heimdall visited a poor couple in their run-down shack on the side of an abandoned road. He announced himself as Rig, because you can't go around telling people, yo, I'm Heimdall, no relation to the god, by the way, how you doing? It's unnecessarily complicated. The couple invited Rig into their home, and he stayed for dinner and spent the night, which for some reason he did, sleeping in between the couple. So when the husband was out cold, Rig repaired the hospitality by getting it on with his wife, bareback. And 9 months later, their wife gave birth to a son that she then named Thrall, which literally translates to slave. Yeah, she named her son Slave. Slave then married a girl named THOR, which translates to slave girl. And keeping with tradition, they gave their kids northern names that translate to mean fat boy, fat calf, fat stinker, and fatty. I'm not kidding. This is literally in the ancient text. In total, they had 12 sons and 9 daughters, and that family and their future offspring became known as the slaves, or more appropriately translated for today, the lower class. Another time, Heimdall pulled his whole "I'm a hungry wanderer named Rick, how you doing?" BS on a couple that was a bit better off. They also invited him in for dinner, and Rig again refused the guest room to instead get cozy in between the couple, waited until the husband was asleep, did the thing with the wife, and 9 months later she gave birth to Karl. Yeah, no cool name like slave, just Karl would later marry a solid wife, and they lived a solid life and had 22 solid children, all with solid names whose meaning translates to mean smith or freeman, and they became the craftsmen, free farmers, the herdsmen, and that stuff, or in other words, the middle class. For his last display of a non-existing pull-out game, Heimdall visited a wealthy couple in their mansion. Same game, and 9 months later, the wife gave birth to a son named Jarl, which is ancient Norse for Lord. That's literally what it means. It means Lord. Jarl was a special boy. He was strong, beautiful, a great hunter, smart, everything you could wish of a man. So Heimdall visited the couple again and said, listen, first of all, I banged your girl. Thanks for the food, by the way. It was very good. And I didn't want anything to do with the fat slave boys or the mediocre farmers, but this boy right here, man, that's a man's man. Name sucks though, Jarl. What even is that? Come on. Let's name him after me, Rig, because I'm awesome. So let's go, little Rig. I'm taking the boy. So Heimdall did take the boy. Jarl's name was officially changed to Rig, and he became a great lord, married a great woman, and had 12 sons with her, all warriors and lords, whose names were all synonyms for royalty and greatness. They became the upper class. So you see how Mr. Steal Your Girl is a fitting nickname for the god that just casually invented classism because he didn't have a pull-out game. Due to his powers of being all-seeing and all-hearing, Heimdall also kind of became the official lost and found of the Norse gods. And when FREYJA once lost her necklace, she went straight to Heimdall to help her find it. Mind you, this was a special necklace. FREYJA had to sleep with 4 dwarfs to get it. No, don't be shocked. That's such a FREYJA thing to do. Watch my FREYJA video for more on that. The necklace was called Brissingamen, and it had the magical power to make its wearer absolutely irresistible. And that's where Loki enters the story, because can you imagine the power of being irresistible in Loki's hands? So Loki stole the necklace, and it didn't take Heimdall long to find out. And when he tracked Loki down, Loki was in the form of a seal. Because of course. So to fight Loki for it, Heimdall also transformed into a seal. Of course. Heimdall won the ensuing seal fight. The necklace was safely returned to FREYJA, and I now want to see an epic blockbuster movie that just builds up with like 2 gods, and then when they go at it in the final fight, they transform into seals from Mortal Kombat. Also, how was Loki able to hold on to the necklace as a seal? They're on their fingers, right? This wasn't the only time Loki and Heimdall clashed, though. They were in essence destined for conflict. Heimdall was the representation of order and literally maintained it on Asgard with his powers, while Loki was the god of mischief, an agent for chaos. Loki frequently came and went into Asgard as he pleased via unofficial means and asked any bouncer. That's super annoying and just makes the job unnecessarily difficult. So Heimdall, not a Loki fan. But all that beef between Heimdall and Loki so far was more fun and games compared to Loki's final act. An act that Heimdall saw coming, an act that caused Heimdall to finally sound the mighty Gjallarhorn. Loki invaded Asgard at the head of an army of evil, determined to destroy Asgard and end the cosmos with it. Of course, the who's who of Norse gods did anticipate this. Freyja, Frigg, and most of all Odin all had visions of this very future. And Odin and Freyja had long created the Valkyries, whose only job was to gather the souls of the bravest and strongest warriors, only for them to train in the great halls of Valhalla day in, day out for millennia in preparation for this very event. So when Heimdall blew the horn to warn Asgard, these warriors were ready and stormed out of Valhalla's 540 gates, joining Odin, Thor, Tyr, and the other gods in their battle against Loki's army of evil, an army that featured Loki's sons, the mighty wolf Fenrir, and the mighty snake Jormungandr, as well as the Jötnar, powerful frost giants who long sought to defeat the gods, and most of all, the army featured Surtur, the fire giant whose sword of flame was destined to destroy Asgard. The god of war from Norse mythology is this guy, THOR. And THOR has one of the most relatable, tragic stories in mythology. A story of tragedy, mutilation, losing his purpose. But hey, at least the man got Tuesday named after him, right? Tuesday? Huh? You cannot possibly tell the story of THOR without also telling the story of Fenrir, a giant wolf, son of Loki but raised by Tyr, until Fenrir was betrayed by one of his father figures and helped to end the cosmos in his quest for vengeance. Damn, this one has all the makings of an epic video, so let's do this. Note that there are some extra details about THOR that don't really fit the flow of my storytelling, but for completion's sake, I want to include them at the end of the video, so watch until then to get everything there is to know about THOR. THOR was born to the Jotun Ymir, and if you're not familiar, the Jotun are often depicted as giants and mostly known as the enemies of the gods. But like every major god is part Jotun, Thor, Odin, THOR, Heimdall. It's like the Aesir gods saw the Jotun as something lesser and thought themselves better than them while they're actually sharing the same blood. I feel like there's some seriously deep social commentary in that statement somewhere. So THOR's father was the Jotun Ymir, and THOR's mother is never mentioned. But we do know that his grandmother was a monster with 900 heads, so if THOR's mother inherited even a fraction of those, I see why Ymir was attracted to her. Oh, Ymir, you freaky Jotun, you. I'm gonna give you a minute in case your innocence needs a moment to figure this one out. THOR and his father Ymir didn't have the best relationship, and it actually ends with Ymir dying because his son THOR and his buddy Thor wanted to get drunk. It's literally the world's most epic beer run, but we'll get to that later because chronologically, THOR and Thor first went on an adventure with very dark consequences. One day, Odin had visions of the end of the world, visions that he called Ragnarok. And he gathered all the gods around to tell them about these visions. So listen, I had a dream, like a vision, a dream, when I dream I have visions. And there's a snake that's gonna kill you, Thor. Just roll with me on this one, it's gonna kill you. And also there's a giant wolf, right? Then that's gonna kill me somehow. And then there's some crazy lady that's somehow half a zombie and it's super scary and we really need to do something. Don't forget that the Norse gods are basically always drunk, so this didn't sound all that crazy to them. And because Loki, who always has something smart to say, kept awfully quiet during all of this, Odin was like, wait a minute, didn't you give birth to an 8-legged horse once? Damn it, you gave birth to a giant snake and a giant wolf, didn't you? Oh, Loki. So Loki told the truth on the condition that everybody promises not to tell his wife, Sigyn, and that truth was that Loki had gotten freaky with a giantess, the Jotun Angrboda. And because Loki went in raw and got the Loki juice, she then gave birth to a serpent, Jormungandr, a wolf, Fenrir, and a girl that was half beautiful and half a corpse, Hel. No one was really surprised by this because it is Loki. But Odin was certain that he could prevent Ragnarok if they go and get the kids and imprison them, because which problem is not solved by kidnapping and child imprisonment, right? So Odin sent Tyr and Thor to get the job done. And when Tyr and Thor realized that their names both start with a T, they were like, bro, TNT, what? So TNT went to Jotunheim, smashed some heads in and kidnapped the wolf, who was still a puppy at the time, kidnapped the serpent, who was still far from its final form, and kidnapped the half-corpse girl, and delivered all of them to Odin in Asgard. Odin then threw the serpent into the oceans to die. He banished the dead corpse girl into the land of the dead, and the wolf puppy, they kept the puppy because even Odin wasn't that heartless. Tyr was the one who took care of Fenrir, the wolf. And I know what you're thinking, isn't Tyr like the god of war? How does he have time to raise a puppy? And you're right, the Vikings were all about warfare, so if anyone would absolutely adore the god of war, it would be them. Problem was, part of the reason the Vikings loved war so much is because when you die in battle, you get to enter Valhalla, and the one who picked the warriors for Valhalla was Odin's Valkyries. So really, in battle and in death, the Vikings worshipped Odin, and Tyr was kind of out of a job. So jobless Tyr was perfect for the task of raising Loki's son Fenrir, and over time, him and Fenrir developed a father-son-like relationship. Mind you that Fenrir was smart as any god, and he could talk and all that, so this went way deeper than your standard dog and owner relationship. It's okay, you don't have to be able to talk. I love you anyway. I love you so much. Tyr and Fenrir built a serious bond, while outside of Tyr, everyone was afraid of Fenrir, because this wolf did not stop growing. Fenrir grew bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, at some point, the Old Norse text said that his fangs touched both sky and ground when wide open, but it's like, holy embellishment, Batman. All right, calm down, bro. What were these Norse mythology writers smoking? Point is, Fenrir was huge. So again, except for Tyr, the Aesir gods were scared of Fenrir. They had not forgotten Odin's drunk story from a while ago, the whole Ragnarok thing about being eaten by a wolf, and seeing Fenrir's size, Odin wasn't exactly sure that keeping Fenrir around on Asgard was the best idea anymore. So he decided that it was time to chain Fenrir up. Problem was, we're talking about a giant wolf. Like, you can't just put a leash on him, tie him up, and call it a day. So the gods had to trick Fenrir. They told him that they were amazed by his size and strength and that they would like to measure it. Even when I wrote that sentence, I was thinking like, that sentence, man. Play that back. Play the last part of that sentence back out of context and tell me you don't have to laugh, man. I'm not being childish. That's just funny. They made Fenrir believe that they wanted to test his strength by putting chains on him to see if he can just bust out of them. See how strong he is. It's a classic in R. Kelly's playbook, really. He called it Saturday Nights. So the gods did that, and Fenrir burst out of the chains. He was too strong. The gods were amazed, and Fenrir was proud. So they did it again, and of course, Fenrir was willing to put on another show, and he burst out of the chains again. Too strong. Can't hold me. Everybody played the part, wowed and amazement, all leading up to the final act of the charade. The gods had special chains crafted by the dwarves, and these chains were as thin as silk, but magical and quite unbreakable, made out of 6 key ingredients that are now forever missing in the world: the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, and the sinew of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spit of the birds. The gods called these chains Gleipnir, and Fenrir was no fool. Everybody knows that once an item has a name, it is special. So Fenrir wasn't really feeling like Gleipnir should be put on him, like it wasn't the best idea. So before he allowed the gods to chain him up again, he asked them for insurance to make sure they don't trick him. The condition was that a god had to put his arm between Fenrir's fangs while he attempts to break free. Just in case. All the gods refused. They were too scared. But THOR knew what was at stake and was willing to sacrifice his arm. Now you might call this ultimate bravery and commitment to Odin's cause and the prevention of Ragnarok, or you might call it the ultimate betrayal against Fenrir. But THOR did what he did. He put his arm between Fenrir's fangs and let him be chained with Gleipnir. And of course, Fenrir could not break out of the magical chains, and he bit THOR's arm off and roared in anger over this betrayal. And as his fangs were wide open, the gods quickly stuck a sword in between them, forever piercing him and forcing his fangs open in an agonizing pain only made worse by THOR's betrayal. That was Fenrir's fate, and it sent Fenrir down a path of hatred, never trusting anyone again. Hatred that would one day drive Fenrir to end the world and confront THOR, the man who broke his heart. Now, who wants to talk about the world's most epic beer run? The gods ran out of alcohol, and they sent Thor to force Aegir, the personification of the sea, to brew more alcohol for them, which major disrespect. Like, dude's kind of the sea personified. Like, he got things to do, like being the sea and all that, floods, all that stuff. But Thor went to Aegir and insisted, and Aegir refused. But Thor really insisted, and Thor is Thor. So Aegir tried to outwit him by saying he doesn't have a cauldron big enough to brew all that alcohol, and that he'd need a cauldron that was at least miles deep, which literally, that's ridiculous because no one has a cauldron that's miles deep. Except THOR was like, yo, my dad's like a raging alcoholic and he has a cauldron that's 10 miles deep. Problem is, we're not really talking, so let's steal it. TNT back in action, baby. TNT rolled up to Hymir's home, and Hymir didn't exactly welcome his son THOR back, but it was his son. So it was like, whatever, you and your friend there, who's clearly overcompensating with that massive hammer, can stay for dinner. They stayed for dinner, and the next morning, Hymir went fishing, and Thor asked if he could come with him. So Hymir let Thor join him on his boat, and you put a Norse god and a Jotun in a small boat in the middle of the ocean, only one thing happens: Brokeback Asgard. They had a contest to see who's stronger and braver. So when Hymir thought they'd rowed far enough into the ocean to fish, Thor said they should row even further, because I'm braver. And when they finally stopped and started fishing, they first caught 2 whales, because why not? And then out there, so deep into the ocean, something bit their bait. Something big, something massive.
It's bigger than that, Chris. It's large.
And with insane strength, Thor reeled it in and pulled the monster out of the depths of the ocean. Actually, monster doesn't even begin to describe it. What emerged out of the oceans was bigger than any monster, bigger than anything anyone could possibly imagine. And Hymir was terrified at its sight and hid in the back of the boat. But Thor was like,
Yes! He's a friend from work.
it was Loki's son, the snake Thor once delivered to Odin to be banished in the ocean. It was the world serpent Jormungandr, which had been roaming the oceans for years and grew so large it could now circle the world entirely. Jormungandr, though, wasn't exactly happy to see Thor again, and the god of thunder immediately got ready to fight. But he only managed to swing at Jormungandr once before Hymir cut the rope to the bait and rowed the boat away into safety. Thor was so pissed at Hymir's cowardice that he slapped him around on the boat. And after they got back to the shore, Hymir was like, yo, that was crazy, wasn't it? So, you want to carry the whales back to my halls or the boat or... And Thor was like, so you want to carry the whales to my halls or the boat? Or shut up, coward. And carried the boat, the whales, and Hymir himself back into the halls, all by himself. And that's how you make a grown man your son. So now, since Thor was basically Hymir's father, him and Tyr simply demanded the cauldron. Remember, they were there for a cauldron, you might have forgotten. But Hymir had a go at one more attempt to retain his pride. He said he would only give them the cauldron they needed for their alcohol if Thor could pass a test of strength. Smash a special goblet. So Thor took that goblet and straight up bazookaed it into a stone pillar, and the entire pillar crumbled. But the goblet was still intact. So then Hymir's wife, Tyr's mom, told Thor to throw the goblet against Hymir's thick head. And Thor did that, and the goblet broke. You don't question the details of the goblet story so much, it's super weird. The point is that Thor made Hymir his son and basically took his girl too, and by street laws, that now also made Thor Tyr's daddy. Defeated, Hymir let Thor take the cauldron, which was so large and heavy that Tyr, with all his strength, could only move it for like inches. But Thor swung that thing on his shoulder like it's nothing and walked out of there. And legend has it that at this point, Thor's balls were so big, he barely fit through the gates of the castle. Now you'd think this story is over, but Hymir wasn't done embarrassing himself. So he and an army of giants ambushed Thor and Tyr on their way home, but TNT simply killed them all. I told you this was the world's most epic beer run. Time for the extra notes. There is reason to believe that Tyr was once considered the supreme god in ancient times, before Norse mythology as we know it was even a thing. This comes down to the fact that over various ancient languages, the root of his name, Tyr, can be traced back to the word Deus, which basically translates to daylight sky god, or just sky, heaven, divine being, basically the god. And it's also where the name Zeus comes from, and a lot of other supreme rulers derive their name from the word Deus, including Tyr somehow. Now granted, this is just a theory because there's not really texts on this, but if it's true, why Tyr was eventually demoted to just be the god of war is unclear. Some assume that his original personality was split up into Odin, Thor, and Tyr, but eventually Tyr ended up as the god of war. And you can argue that the loss in status might be symbolized in the loss of an arm in the stories. If that whole sinews of a bear's thing was weird to you in the ingredients, yeah, that was weird to me too, because that's not something that doesn't exist in the world. Bears have sinews, even though they're really short. This might all come down to a very bad translation, and instead of sinews, it might have been the nerves of a bear, implying that nerves are brave and fearless. Also, in another version of Norse mythology, Odin is said to be Tyr's father, but that version literally contradicts itself in itself, and it doesn't make any sense. So it's generally accepted that Hymir was Tyr's dad, and there was actually no point in me telling you this other than to show you how confusing and contradicting Norse mythology can sometimes be. So forget that, Hymir is Tyr's dad. Also, it's important to note that in his role as the god of war, Tyr was also the god of law and justice. So he also oversaw assemblies to settle disputes and elect leaders before it became actual bloodshed warfare. In that regard, he was kind of a strategic god of war, more in the sense of Athena or the Romans' Mars, rather than just the bloodthirsty god of war like Ares was often depicted as. Hel and Baldur, the queen of the underworld and the god of light. Their stories go hand in hand, and some even think they might be what we today consider to be the devil and God. One is a daughter of Loki, the other is a son of Odin. Both are dead, yet both survive Ragnarok. And that's kind of deep. I'm not gonna lie, I feel like the Riddler a little bit. Both are dead, yet both survive Ragnarok. You know, people think they're deep too when they start using the word yet like that. Yet both survive. They are two sides of a coin. Hel was hated from the moment she was born, banished to die as an innocent child. And Baldur was so loved that his people did everything they could to grant him immortality. I feel like I just set the stage for an epic. Let's do this. Our story starts with Hel, who was born to Loki and his side chick, the giantess Angrboda, which literally translates to the one who brings grief. And if you look at the children she bore him, you kind of understand why. A giant wolf, a giant snake, and a girl that is half a corpse. The girl was Hel, and her brothers lived in secret with their mother in the harsh cold of Jotunheim, while Loki lived the good life with his wife and their two sons in golden shiny Asgard. Then, one day, Odin, the All-Father, had visions of the end of the world, and in those visions, he saw that the end of the world would involve a giant wolf, a giant snake, and a girl that is half a corpse. And Loki was like, shit. Odin forced the location of the kids out of Loki and solved the problem by chaining up the wolf, exiling the snake, and banishing the little girl to certain death. He threw her into hell. So there she was, the little girl in the land of the dead. And I know this sounds like the beginning of an epic adventure, but from here on out, everything is lost. We have no sources on how her tale continues, but we do know how it ends. Hint, hint, the underworld in Norse mythology is literally called Helheim. The girl's name is Hel, and Heim means home. This girl rose through the ranks like a pimp on steroids and made Hel her bitch. Excusez mon français, but there is just no other way to say this. When you name the dreaded underworld after yourself and make it your home, you're a pimp on steroids, and that place is your bitch now. So after dominating the underworld gang wars, Dawn Hel settled into the throne of Helheim, and now a grown woman, she ruled over the dead like a boss. And let's see what Baldur was up to while all this was going on. Baldur was born to Odin and his wife Frigg, and he had two brothers, Hermod, the messenger of the gods, and Hödr, the blind god. Also, THOR and HEIMDALL were two of his half-brothers. Baldur's life was literally the exact opposite of Hel's, not only because he grew up with his family, but because Baldur's life was all about light. While Hel was cast into darkness, Baldur was the god of light. Hel had to dominate an underworld gang war and become a mob boss to survive, and Baldur was simply loved by everyone due to the virtue of him being him. He was the god of beauty, nobility, peace, and happiness. He was the representation of what it means to be loved, and thus all loved him. It was impossible to hate the guy, and I'm not saying that as a figure of speech. This is mythology. Things like that are literal here. It was impossible to hate Baldur since he personified the light and warmth you would describe love with, and yet somehow this lovable god ended up getting killed. How? Loki. Of course it's Loki. There's a rule that any rule that ever existed does not apply to Loki. Loki hated Baldur, and it didn't help that Odin locked away Loki's children while Odin's kids were living their best life on Asgard. So it was music to Loki's ears that there was this prophecy going around that Baldur was fated to die and spend his life in the underworld. And this is where we revisit Hell. Odin was obviously aware of this prophecy, and he wasn't about to let his beloved son die. So he put on his famous Gandalf the Grey Wanderer outfit, got on his 8-legged horse, Sleipnir, and rode into the underworld. And that's not just a quick countryside stroll. Getting to the underworld took him 9 nights, and to get there Odin had to cross through the freezing cold dark ice realm, Niflheim, until he reached the river Gjöll, a river that didn't have water flowing through it but daggers instead, and this river separated Helheim from the other realms, and the only way to cross it was a golden bridge that was hanging by only a single hair and was guarded by the female skeleton Modgud. What is this? Dark Souls Valhalla edition? Come on, From Software, I know you wrote this, come on. Luckily, Odin was on his New Game Plus, so he got past all those obstacles and made it into the halls of Hell all the way to its queen, the eponymous Hell, who I like to think around these parts was simply known as the Dawn. Usually Hell's halls weren't exactly inviting, cause like they had another river running through them that had swords instead of water this time. But today, the place looked kinda nice. There were tables out, all set with drinks and food, and there was gold everywhere. It kinda looked like a reception. So when Odin saw Hell decorating the place, he was like, "Ah, Hell, come on, I know it's been a while, but you really shouldn't have. Shut up, fake Gandalf, this is not for you, what do you want?" Odin told Hel about this prophecy that his son Baldur was bound to die, and if there was anything she could do about, yeah, your boy gonna die, who do you think I'm doing all this for? Odin was shocked, but Hel was happy, because Baldur would finally bring his light and happiness to the underworld. Because, you see, the underworld wasn't actually an evil, dark place. All the great warriors go to Odin's Valhalla and Freyja's Folkvanger, yeah, but everybody else, the non-fighters, those who die of old age or illness or TikTok challenges, they all end up here. Basically, most of the dead end up right here in Helheim, and Hel was their caretaker, so she cared for the place to be nice, to make sure everybody has a relaxing afterlife. Sure, the evil ones had their own place in Hell called Naustrund, which casually translates to corpse shore, and was a place where they were devoured by the dragon Nidhogg. But everybody else, chillin', living their second life of eternal rest and peace. Granted, Hell could use some maintenance, and maybe they could get rid of the deadly sword rivers and have a friendlier receptionist than the skeleton, who I do appreciate is female, because it was so hard to find work for female skeletons back in those days, but it doesn't exactly help the image of Hell when a skeleton is the first face you see. You know what I mean? So, to make a long side note explanation of why Hel was happy to receive Baldur even longer, Baldur's light and warmth was missing in the underworld, and Hel was delighted that Baldur was finally about to die and couldn't wait to receive him. In other words, she confirmed Odin's worries and said there's nothing she can do, and then sent fake Gandalf packing back past the River of Daggers, back on his 9 nights journey back to Asgard. Odin returned to his wife Frigg with no solution for how to avoid their son's fate. So Frigg came up with an idea. Let's just get an oath from every single existing entity to never harm Baldur. And Odin was like, every single... Yeah, bro, that's gonna take ages. But Frigg reminded Odin that he owed her for cheating and having a baby with Freyja, and those 9 Jotun women that gave birth to Heimdall, and the giant lady that gave birth to Thor. So, asking every single existing entity it was. From gods to animals, to rocks, to rivers, everything swore an oath not to harm Baldur. Everything except for one little plant that lives hidden inside bigger plants, the mistletoe. The mistletoe literally survives by harming other plants, so it was scared to give an oath to not harm anything, and it hid from Odin and Frigg, and when they realized they forgot to ask the mistletoe, they figured, what's a little mistletoe gonna do? Come on. And they were happy with Baldur's blessing. Everything had sworn the oath, so nothing could harm him. Baldur was. But then there was Loki, who still wanted to pay Odin back for what he did, and hated Baldur even more now. God of light, everybody loves him, and they go out of the way to make him invincible. What the hell? Get it? Double meaning, what the hell? Because like, what about hell? My daughter, what the hell? I gotta stop explaining my jokes. Loki was fed up, so he transformed into an old lady, and in disguise, casually asked Frigg, "So, got an oath from everything then, huh? That must have taken forever." "Ah, yeah, man, took a while." "Are you sure you didn't forget anything? Because, you know, me and oaths were like, tight, right?" I can get some last oaths if you forgot anything. That's a tough word. Oaths. Say that 5 times real quick in a row. You know what I mean? But just in case you forgot anything, I can get them. I don't know. Maybe you forgot an oath. You forget something? Nah, man, we good. We just forgot the mistletoe. But okay, thank you, bye. So Loki made an arrow out of mistletoe and then tricked Baldur's blind brother Hodr into shooting the laurel arrow at Baldur, and Baldur was dead. Yeah, I know, all this build-up, and then I just dump Baldur's death on you. That's not a satisfying climax. But you know what, brothers? Now you know how girls feel. Woo! And that's how you build a joke. Built that up. I was leading them on like Baldur's death. The climax is Baldur's death. But that's like orgasm. Women's orgasm. You know what I mean? For the ladies. You know, they're gonna love this stuff. I really need to stop explaining my jokes. Well, anyway, Baldur was dead, and off to the underworld he went. Hell received Baldur in the underworld, and again, this was not punishment or gloom and doom. Everybody that didn't die in battle came here, so Baldur was one of many, just more special because he was a god and he did bring his warmth and light, and everybody loved Baldur down here too. He made Hell's eternal Heim feel complete. So Dawn Hell wasn't exactly happy when another unwanted visitor came knocking. Hermod, Baldur's brother. Hermod begged Hel to return his brother, since the world is not the same without him, and at least the underworld is not used to Baldur's presence yet, but the world of the living is suffering without the god of light. Usually Hel would never return anyone to life, but since she, like everybody else, had grown to love Baldur, she could understand exactly how much they loved and needed him in the world of the living. So she struck a deal with Hermod. If Hermod can get every existing entity to shed a tear and say they miss Baldur, to prove that the world of the living truly can't go on without him, then the beloved god may come back to life. So Hermod was like every single entity? Bro, that's gonna take ages. Bruh, do you want your brother back or not? And with this, Hermod rode off, back across the river of daggers, back through the cold realms, back for 9 nights, all the way to Asgard. Once in Asgard, Hermod told everybody the good news and asked if anybody was down to help him ride around the realms to every single existing entity to collect testimonials. But they were like, nah, bro, I'm good. You got this. Hermod rode around the cosmos and got all the teary-eyed testimonials saying how much they miss Baldur and want him back. And he was finally down to the last one, the giantess THOR. Hermod asked her if she misses Baldur, already knowing the answer. But she said, nah, fam, don't miss him. No, not at all. Hermod couldn't believe it, but the giant doubled down. Nah, man, Baldur's the worst, bro. One time, he borrowed my DVD, Asgard 4, Backdoor Thor. Dude borrowed it for so long, I had to borrow it back. The giantess said she simply does not miss Baldur, and Hermod was shocked. They made a sequel to Asgard 3, Thor's Hammer Strikes Back? Word. There was nothing Hermod could do to convince the giantess, and as he rode off in disbelief, he heard the giantess chuckle from a distance, and Hermod immediately recognized that devilish chuckle. Loki. Now you have to remember Baldur's anticlimactic death from earlier, right? Loki had tricked Baldur's blind brother Hodr into shooting that deadly arrow. So while that was weird, because no one understood why Hodr would randomly just do that, no one really suspected Loki until Now, everything dawned on Hermod once he saw that Loki had transformed into the giantess. He put it all together and knew Loki's guilt on the spot. So Hermod turned around to confront Loki, but Loki then quickly shapeshifted from the giantess into a salmon and disappeared into a nearby river. So of course, Hermod got back up and was now on a mission to catch Loki. Thor and other gods joined in on this mission to catch Loki in his fish form, and to be honest, this is one of the weirder tales in Norse mythology because you have these powerful gods making fish nets, trying to catch Loki in the river. It really feels like a bad filler episode. But ultimately, Thor caught Loki with his bare hands and squeezed so hard to hold on to the slippery salmon Loki that he squished the salmon, and that's why salmons are now flat towards their fin. So the gods took Loki prisoner, and they didn't just punish him, but also his family on Asgard. One of Loki's sons was transformed into a wild wolf and made to kill the other son, and then they used the intestines of the dead son to tie Loki up in a dark cave. Bruh. So there Loki was, painfully tortured on top of that with poison dripping on his forehead, and his loyal wife Sigyn tried her best to shield him from the poison as much as possible by collecting its deadly drips in a bowl, thus staying by his side during this lifelong sentence. So now, Loki's two Aesir sons were dead. Loki was forever tied to a rock in a cave. His son Fenrir was tied to another rock in another cave, while his other son Jörmungandr was exiled to the oceans. Meanwhile, in the underworld, Dawn Hel was still the kingpin, still had Baldur in her realm, since not everything had wept for him to come back to life. And Hel commanded all the dead, which meant she basically was ruling over the biggest of all the realms. And while Valhalla and Folkvangr were filled with hundreds of thousands of warriors endlessly battling, Helheim was filled with millions of souls, all loyal to Hel, who took care of them in the afterlife, which ultimately was the eternal life, and thus Hel ruled over them way longer than Odin ever did. Hel was powerful, and Odin exiled her as a kid and now just screwed over her entire family. Needless to say, she was not on good terms with Odin, and one day Hel would use her power to assemble the biggest army Asgard and the gods would ever face, the army of the dead, which would be led by her father Loki in an attack against their common enemy in Asgard, Odin. Ragnarok, the end of the world. The final battle in Norse mythology, where every god clashes with his nemesis. Loki fights Heimdall, Thor fights Loki's son Jörmungandr, the giant snake monster, Odin fights the giant wolf Fenrir, and the strongest of the enemies, a massive fire giant foretold to destroy the world, clashes with the unlikeliest of gods, Freyja, the god of fertility, whose symbol was a dick. Yeah, he had a dick as a symbol. He was worshipped with phallus statues, which is just a fancy way to say that he was worshipped with ancient dildos. And that's more or less the lineup for Ragnarok. And now I'll tell you about how the bad guys sailed to battle on a ship made out of toe and fingernails. So let's do this. The starting point of Ragnarok is hard to define, but you could say it all started with two blood brothers at odds, Odin and Loki, sworn brothers turned enemies after Odin had a vision of the end of the world. A giant wolf, a giant snake, and a half-dead woman would bring ruin to all, and the death of Odin's son Baldur would be the catalyst for all of this, which Odin named Ragnarok. Once he found out that all these bringers of doom were his blood brother Loki's children, Odin decided that it is now Cosmos before Bros and locked Loki's children up. So Loki was kind of mad and killed Odin's son Baldur in return. And then Odin was kind of mad and locked Loki up in a cave where Loki was eternally tortured, chained up under a snake that would constantly drip poison on his forehead. Poison that caused pain so agonizing that every time it hit Loki's skin, he shook so viciously from the pain that it sent earthquakes through all the realms. And that turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because over time, those earthquakes loosened Loki's shackles and the god broke free. And now, Loki was no longer the god of mischief, agent of chaos. Now, Loki was an agent of vengeance, out for the blood of his former blood brother, Odin. And if you think Loki is in the wrong here, allow me to summarize. Because of a vision, Odin chained up Loki's son Fenrir, exiled his other son Jormungandr, and he threw Loki's little girl into hell. But that same vision told Odin that his own son, Baldur, that his death would be the real catalyst for Ragnarok. But did Odin lock Baldur up to avoid him from getting killed? No. Odin gave Baldur immortality, and then the gods celebrated immortal Baldur by throwing spears and axes at him and firing arrows at the guy. If I was Loki, I'd be pissed too. So during the immortal Baldur celebrations, Loki found a way to kill Baldur, which brings me full circle to Loki now being locked up. But here's a detail I left out earlier. Before Odin locked Loki up, he went after Loki's two remaining sons. He transformed one of them into a wolf and had him kill the other one, and then tied Loki up with the intestines of that other dead son. I repeat, if I was Loki, I'd be pissed too. And then you torture your former blood brother with poison for centuries? Don't mind me. I'm just taking my imaginary Loki earrings off because brother is going down. So once Loki broke free, he took his built-up hatred straight to his daughter to gather an army. Oh, did I forget to mention that the little girl Odin threw into the underworld, Loki's daughter, survived and rose up through the ranks of the underworld to become the queen of the underworld? Hel literally named the place after herself and ruled Helheim and its millions and millions of dead souls. And when Papa Loki came knocking because someone had to get got, Hel and her army of the dead were ready to avenge their family. In fact, Hel been ready. When she heard that her father and brothers got locked up, she started making a warship out of toe and fingernails. I feel like this was gangsta up until now, but now it got weird. But she did what she did. And then Loki and Hel freed Fenrir and Jormungandr to join them in battle. And did I mention that Fenrir was described as being so huge, his open fangs touched the sky and the earth, and that Jormungandr was described as being so huge it could encircle the world? Yeah, even if those are exaggerations, like when a dude says he's packing 12 inches, it still means that the reality is huge.
It's bigger than that, Chris. It's large.
And with the family reunited on their toenail ship, they all set sail for Jotunheim to find allies for their upcoming battle. In a way, the Jötnar are the same as the gods. The gods just cleverly invented classism and gave themselves the title gods, and specifically Aesir. They just saw themselves as something better and oppressed the Jötnar and called them evil, even though the Jötnar are their kin. But allow me to explain in more detail. The first being in Norse mythology was born out of cold rime in the ice realm Niflheim, out of rime melting and thawing and dripping, and that dripping liquid formed into Ymir, the first being, who already didn't do pronouns before it was cool because he was really genderless and had the ability to create life all on his own. So in his image, on his own, he created the Jötnar. And while Ymir did his thing, Udumbla, a giant cow who was also born out of nothing, created life by licking a rhymestone into the shape of Buri, the first god. So What's the difference between Buri and Ymir? Both were simply born out of a rhyme job. And at the time, Jötnar and gods didn't even have labels for each other and would not have looked any different from one another. They lived in peace and created offspring together. They were united. Then the second generation of those children were Odin and his brothers. And Odin came up with the idea to call himself an Aesir god for no reason other than him thinking he's better. And then he and his brothers killed Ymir and all the Jötnar and created all the realms out of Ymir's body, flesh, bones, and blood. Yeah.
That escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
From then on, Odin labeled the Jötnar as lesser and forced them to live in the cold realms of Jotunheim. Man, if you send me to live in an ice realm after genociding my entire ancestry, yeah, I get a little frosty. Yeah, I get a little destructive and angry. So the Jötnar eventually just became these evil frost giants who represent destruction. But in short, just like Loki, this is another monster of Odin's making. Good job, Dr. Frankenstein. And this is where Papa Loki and his family come swooping into Jotunheim to talk to the Jötnar's leader, Rim. All chill, like, hey, bro. So we got a cool ship made of fingernail. And we're thinking about taking down the Aesir, you know? And here you're a captain looking for some violence. You down? But despite Loki not being cool and chill at all, him and the Jötnar were so down. And now, only one party was missing in Loki's army of evil. Actually, let's not call it army of evil. It's basically Loki's family and his ancestors. So let's call them family and the gang. That's better. There was only one person missing from family and the gang, the most powerful being of all. Ymir was born out of the melting ice on Niflheim. That wasn't just random. Niflheim was slowly melting under the heat of the other ancient realm, Muspelheim, the home of eternal fire. But on Muspelheim, life was also created at roughly the same time. A fire giant born only to end the world. And his name was
Sasa, son of a bitch.
He is the most powerful being in Norse mythology, and his purpose was simple: to die and make everything die with him. Good thing he didn't attend a high school in America. Surtur represents the death part of the cycle of life and death, a cycle that started when Odin killed Ymir to create the realms, when death gave way to life. In a way, Surtur represents the fire that once gave life to Ymir, so it's poetic that he's now the fire that represents the death coming for Odin and Asgard. Surtur was the natural enemy to the life Odin created. Surtur was death. And that sounds super epic until you realize that Surtur somehow also has an army of fire giants that he keeps on growing in his fire realm until the day of Ragnarok. And when you put two and two together and realize they're all males, it's like Surtur was just sitting there beaching himself off and creating death from his nuts. Anyway, somehow solo Surtur created a bunch of fire giants by himself and simply waited many lifetimes for the day the prophecy is fulfilled, for the day Loki came knocking. And that day was today, when family and the gang rolled up on Surtur like, hey, sorry to interrupt. But is he joking? Oh my God, is that fire coming out? Anyway, so we've got this ship, and I know you're made out of fire, so don't worry about no wood on the ship. The only wood is right. He's still going. Yeah, the only wood is right there. And we kind of want you and your fire buddies to come help us kill Odin and those guys. Yeah, cool. This was all Surtur was waiting for. So my guy was down, and family and the gang were complete. All aboard the toenail ship headed towards Asgard to kill themselves some Aesir gods. The first to know that family and the gang were coming was Heimdall. For centuries, he'd been standing guard at the Bifrost, the bridge that connects Asgard to the other realms, waiting and watching for this very moment. And since Heimdall could see into the future, he was able to give the gods a warning ahead of time by blowing into his famous Gjallarhorn, a blow so powerful that it was heard throughout all of Asgard, and everybody got ready for the battle they knew was coming all along. Odin readied his army of undead Vikings, the Einherjar, who had been training in Valhalla for centuries and were so many that they endlessly stormed out of Valhalla's 540 gates, each so wide that 800 soldiers could fit through side by side. Meanwhile, Freyja had just as many warriors join in from her own eternal combat hall of the undead Folkvanger. Both Valhalla and Folkvanger were filled with warriors hand-picked by the Valkyries, filled with warriors that died bravely in battle and since forever trained for this very day. And if you want to know just how elite this force is, each warrior carried the title Einherji, which translates to Army of One. They were ready, as were the gods. Thor, Heimdall, Odin, they all headed for Vigrir, the battlefield that the fight was destined to take place on, the battlefield where family and the gang had anchored their toenail ship. So now the armies battled and Ragnarok was on. The army of the dead clashed with the undead Vikings. Odin bravely faced Fenrir, Thor battled Jörmungandr, and Heimdall took on Loki himself. And to make all of this even more epic, all these battles took place in complete darkness, only illuminated by the flames of Surtur's sword and his army of fire giants, because the sun and the moon didn't exist anymore. They had been devoured. While family and the gang sailed through the oceans on toenails, the sons of Fenrir had their own battle. The wolves Skuld and Hati fought against the goddess Sol and her brother Mani, the personifications of the sun and the moon, and the wolves won. They killed the sun and her brother. So now it was up to the Aesir gods to stop the threat, mostly Surtur, the mighty fire giant who wields the flame sword that all knew was foretold to burn the world. And the one to take on Surtur was Freyr, the god worshipped via ancient dildo statues. He was destined to fight Surtur, and yet somehow the dude forgot to bring his sword to the fight, so Freyr was killed. And everybody was doomed. I'm not even kidding. I mean, to be fair, Freyr traded his sword a while back for the hand of his wife, the love of his life. Yeah, sure, romantic, whatever. But the guy didn't bring his sword. It was a special sword. It could fight on its own, you know, like Alucard in Castlevania. Like, bro, that was your destiny. So, yeah, Freyr dead. And I guess it's fun that the guy who was beating off in isolation, creating an army of fire giants, would fight the guy worshipped by dildos and beat his ass, and that's how the universe ends. But still, bro, bring your sword. And if you think that Thor or somebody else swoops in to save the day, nah, man. Thor and Jörmungandr killed each other, Loki and Heimdall killed each other, and Fenrir killed Odin, and then Odin's son Vidar killed Fenrir by ripping his jaws apart. But Vidar couldn't stop Surtur either, and Surtur ultimately did what he came to do, and burned the world, and with it ended all life. And then the world sunk into the rising sea, and it was over. But from the ashes, a new cycle was born. A new sun emerged, the daughter of the dead sun goddess Sol. She took her mother's name and place in the sky and brought life to a new world that emerged from the sea. 2 humans survived to repopulate the human race. A few of the gods survived. Vidar, who killed Fenrir, and his brother Vali, as well as Thor's sons Magni and Modi. And also Baldur and his brother Hodr returned from the underworld to see this new world with their own eyes. And this is where this leads over into my extra notes, because we don't know much about what happens after Ragnarok, since this is where Norse mythology ends. One might say we are now in this very cycle, or one might say that all of this is just me telling you about Odin's visions, which is the only version of Ragnarok we have because it has not happened yet. Who knows? What I do know is that this is also the end of keeping up with the Norse gods. So thank you for watching my retelling of the ancient stories, and what will follow this series will be a 5-part series on history's greatest conquerors: Napoleon, Caesar, Alexander, Genghis Khan, and Cyrus. But before that, there are some things I left out of this video for the sake of storytelling, so time for the extra notes. In this video, I embellished a little more than usual for several reasons. Ragnarok is only talked about in bits and pieces through tales of visions, and it's tough to turn it into a coherent story. And another reason is that throughout my Keeping Up with the Norse Gods series, I basically already gave the whole build-up for Ragnarok over hours of videos. So it's really worth watching all of those to get the proper build-up in full detail and from all angles. Ragnarok isn't just announced by Heimdall, by the way, but also by a 3-year winter called Fimbulvetra, which kind of makes Heimdall's announcement useless, because he's like, that's the horn, Ragnarok is here, everybody get ready, and they're like, bro, you think? Bro, we knew about this for 3 years. Have you looked outside? Damn. This winter is not just 3 years, but it's some serious Game of Thrones winter is coming type stuff, and it's so harsh that it leads to a breakdown of society with starvation, war, cannibalism, and with the sun and moon also disappearing, it wouldn't even need Loki's family and the gang to end the world of the humans. I didn't mention Tyr's battle because he gets an extra note here. Tyr fights Gamr during Ragnarok, a hellhound. And there's a lot more to that. If you watched my Tyr video, you know that Tyr is the one who raised Fenrir and sacrificed his arm to bind Fenrir. Now Tyr is the god of war, but due to the origin of his name, there's reason to believe that in older Germanic beliefs, Tyr was once the same as Odin. This would make a lot of sense, since in that narrative, Tyr would have had visions of Fenrir killing him, decide to raise Fenrir instead to change his fate, then imprison Fenrir once he grows too big and out of control, and then fights Fenrir and dies to him during Ragnarok. Great, complete story, right? The Odin we know fighting Fenrir just seems kind of random, and Tyr finding Gamr, the hellhound, a different canine, is also kind of random, but it makes more sense once you understand that it might be an alternate version that developed over time out of the ancient Tyr that was once Odin fighting Fenrir. Kind of complicated, but you get me. And that's that. Thank you for watching all the episodes of Keeping Up with the Norse Gods. Don't forget to subscribe, because I'll probably revisit Norse mythology at some point, but now get ready for this new series.